Hey everybody, welcome to the second part of information processing in neural networks. So the first part, if you have not seen it, please watch that first before coming to this video. So here, today we are going to talk about an important concept, that is what information is represented. So in order for information to be processed by a system, the information first, it has to be explicitly represented in the system. Like if you want to know what that thing is, you have to see it, right? Like if there's a building over there, only when you see the building is when you'll be able to get information about that particular building. So in order to understand this, how this neural circuit process information, first we have to determine how it is represented. So in order to understand this question, so we understand this in a very rudimentary level, like we don't clearly understand how how our body processes a visual information. Like for example, you're looking at a building, so how is that information processed inside is not very well understood, but we understand it in a very rudimentary level. So for this, we'll take an example based on the anatomical connectivity of the eyes. So for this, I will show you a picture which makes it more clear. So I hope you can see this diagram. So here we are trying to understand like the anatomical connectivity of eyes. So from this image, you can deduce that there is a region which is called as LGN, which stands for lateral geniculate nucleus, and this is present in the thalamus. And we know that this particular region is important for visual information. And so this acts like the starting point to understand how the information is information is understood. And we also need to know precisely what aspect of the visual information is presented. For example, you're looking at a building. So there are two ways in which this visual information can be processed. One is the LGN activity represented by point distribution of illuminance intensity at each location. See, for example, if this is normally how you look at if you see a building, but sometimes this is because of the point distribution of the luminance, or you can also visualize the image based on the contrast, like the local contrast of the illuminance. So that is the two possible representations of visual information here. One is by the luminance across the image, or by local contrast of the illuminance. So once we understand that, like how the processing of these neural circuits happen, we can determine explicitly what information is represented in that particular circuit. Completed what information is represented and how we can visualize that particular information. Now coming to the second part, that is how is the information encoded. So in addition to understand what is represented in the neural circuit, we have to understand how that particular information is represented. What is represented, and also how it is how this particular information is represented, and what are the different neural codes which help in conveying these information to the brain. And the nervous system has different ways in which they can represent information. One is information can be represented by the firing rate of the individual neurons, and you can also take into account the average rate of the entire population of the neuron by precise timing of firing among one or more neurons by the coding scheme. So that is one way in which you can encode how the information is loaded, that is by the firing rate of the neuron. And understanding what information is represented in the circuit and also how it is encoded, these are like two intertwined questions. Like you cannot separate one from the other, like how the information is represented in the circuit and also how it is encoded. So we cannot answer one without knowing the other. So that is why it is very difficult to decipher complex neural circuits. So with this, we have completed how the information is encoded. So now we'll go to the next part, that is how information is decoded. So the information is decoded, and so the information, whichever information is encoded into the representation, it can only be useful if you can decode this particular information. And by a downstream receiver. So in our case, the downstream receiver is a neuron. The downstream receiver is a neuron or a circuit. Like for example, so I'll just repeat this particular part. So how is the information decoded? So if you want to understand how the information is decoded, like whatever information you have seen that is represented and encoded, it can only be decoded by a downstream receiver, which is in our case, we are taking an example of a neuron or a circuit. So to understand this, let's take an example. So if you look at this particular number, that is this, if you look at this, you can understand the meaning of this. You know that this is a number 10101, right? So organic or chemical coding can be done. But imagine this is shown to a person who have no idea what numbers are, or this person is illiterate, and you give them a bunch of newspaper articles to read. So it doesn't, even though you can visually see it and you can see the information, but you won't be able to decode it. You won't be able to understand what this particular number means. So which means to say that no matter how cleverly or efficiently a neural coding scheme can represent the information in the neural circuits, the representation is useless if the receiver of that information is unable to decode. So decoding is very important. So even if representation is there and you're not able to understand this, decoding cannot be done. Thus, we can say that the evolution of neural encoding schemes is constrained by the ability of the neurons and the neural circuits to decode information. So the neural encoding schemes are constrained by decoding, which means that if you don't have prior information to that particular thing what you're already seeing, you won't be able to understand what it is. Like if you don't know numbers and you're given a bunch of numbers, you will not be able to understand what this means. So that is how these encoding and decoding are intertwined with each other. So with this, we'll just summarize the whole part. So understanding how a brain system processes information requires knowing what the information is represented, and also how the information is encoded, as well as how the information is encoded and decoded, and what are the different computations which are required in order to understand the computations and the processing which are required to understand this particular information and the different stages of processing. And the most important thing is that any encoding scheme is constrained by the ability of the downstream neurons to decode this information. So the neural encoding schemes are constrained by decoding. So if you're not able to understand, or you don't have prior information to the objects or whatever you're looking at, you won't be able to decode that. So decoding becomes completely useless. So information discussed in today's video is from this book chapter, and I will link the same in the description. And we have just scratched the surface. We have tried to understand how the information is represented, how the information is encoded, decoded, and the computations. There's a lot more to this, where if you're interested, you can go through it, where you can some of the neural circuits which has been understood well, like for example you have the cerebellum circuits and so on and so forth. So if you are interested in that, you can go through that. And yeah, with this, thank you for your time, and if you found this video useful, do consider subscribing. So I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious.